The Dance of Hearts in the glittering desert mirage of Las Vegas, where fortunes change with every roll of the dice and loyalty is bought with chips. Ruby Stone had learned to fade into the neon background. But tonight she would dance the old steps, and in doing so seal her fate with the king of Vegas himself. The neon sign of Lucky's Diner flickered against the dying October sun, casting long shadows across the cracked parking lot. This wasn't the glamorous strip with its towering resorts and manufactured fantasies. This was the other Vegas, the real Vegas, the place where dealers and waitresses and pit bosses lived when the sequins came off and the makeup washed away. Ruby Stone moved through the afternoon shift with the practiced efficiency of someone who had long ago mastered the art of invisibility. 24 years old, and already she felt like a ghost haunting the red vinyl booths and chipped Formica counters. Her honey blonde hair was pulled back in a ponytail that had seen better days. Her amber eyes, which might have been striking under different circumstances, remained carefully downcast. The uniform, a faded pink dress with white trim that belonged to another era entirely, hung on her slender frame like a costume from a play that had closed decades ago. She wiped down table after table in the empty diner, her movements automatic. The smell of burnt coffee and old grease had long ago stopped registering. It was simply the scent of survival, of another day closer to the dream that lived in a shoebox under her bed. Yale School of Drama, theater design, a world away from this desert purgatory. $10,400 saved, $17,600 to go. The jukebox in the corner played softly, permanently stuck on the classics. Sinatra crooned about flying to the moon, and Ruby hummed along without thinking. Her grandmother had taught her these songs. Stella Stone, the showgirl who had danced at the Tropicana when Vegas still meant something, when the city had magic instead of just money. Stella had been dead 2 years now. Cancer, quick and merciless. She had died in a county hospital with Ruby holding her hand, humming "The Lady is a Tramp," because it had always been Stella's favorite. Ruby kept her grandmother's rhinestone earrings in her locker. Real rhinestones from real shows. Sometimes on very slow shifts, she would take them out and hold them up to the light, watching them sparkle like the Vegas that used to be. The bell above the door chimed. Ruby glanced up, her customer service smile already in place, and felt it freeze. Pearl Diamond had arrived for her Tuesday afternoon visit. The other waitresses, Candy and Crystal, suddenly discovered urgent tasks in the kitchen. They always did when Pearl came in. Mr. Jenkins, the day manager with his perpetual scowl and coffee-stained tie, pointedly looked the other way. Nobody wanted to deal with the rich old lady who was clearly losing her mind. But Ruby saw something different when she looked at Pearl Diamond. She saw her grandmother. Pearl was small and delicate, probably barely 5 feet tall, even in her youth. Now, at 68, she seemed to be slowly disappearing, as if she were fading into the past that clearly consumed so much of her thoughts. She wore vintage Chanel, the real thing from decades ago, maintained with obvious care. Her silver hair was styled in an elaborate updo that belonged to another era. Diamonds glittered at her throat and wrists, real stones that caught the diner's fluorescent lights and threw tiny rainbows across the worn linoleum. But it was her eyes that told the real story. Blue eyes, once probably vibrant and sharp, now clouded with confusion and profound sadness. She clutched a beaded purse from the 1970s and looked around the diner as if surprised to find herself there, even though she came every Tuesday and Thursday at exactly 2 in the afternoon. Ruby approached with the gentle manner she had learned from caring for Stella. "Good afternoon, Miss Pearl. Your usual table?" Pearl's face brightened with recognition, not of Ruby specifically, the dementia made that difficult, but recognition of kindness, which was apparently rare enough in her world to be memorable. "Oh, yes, thank you, dear. Is it Tuesday?" "It is. Would you like your coffee? I remember how you take it." Real cream, not the chemical creamer most customers got. A single sugar cube, not the packets. Ruby had learned Pearl's preferences through careful observation, the way she had once learned her grandmother's needs. Pearl settled into the corner booth with visible relief. Ruby noticed the 2 men who had followed her in, now taking their positions at a booth by the door. They wore expensive dark suits that fit too well to hide the bulges under their arms. Security. Bodyguards. They ordered nothing, drank nothing, simply sat and watched with the patient intensity of predators. Ruby had seen enough Vegas to recognize muscle when she saw it. She brought Pearl her coffee, prepared exactly right, and set it down with a gentle smile. "There you are, Miss Pearl. Is there anything else I can get you?" Pearl's hands trembled slightly as she reached for the cup. For a moment her eyes cleared, and she looked directly at Ruby with sudden piercing awareness. You're kind to an old woman. That's rare. So rare. Her voice carried traces of something else beneath the confusion. Education. Breeding. A life that had once been very different. You remind me of when things were beautiful. Before Ruby could respond, Pearl began to hum, softly at first, then with growing confidence. Ruby recognized the melody immediately. The Lady is a Tramp. Stella's song. Without thinking, Ruby began to hum along. Pearl's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling, really smiling. The confusion seemed to lift like morning fog, and for just a moment, Ruby saw the woman Pearl must have been. Bright, alive, beautiful. You know the old songs, Pearl whispered. Nobody knows the old songs anymore. My grandmother taught me. She was a showgirl, Tropicana, back in the 60s. Stella? Pearl's grip on the coffee cup tightened. Stella Stone, with the red feathers? Ruby felt her heart skip. You knew her? Knew her, darling, we worked the same circuit. She was magnificent, absolutely magnificent. The way she could command a stage. Pearl trailed off, lost in memory, but it was a good place to be lost. Better than the present, certainly. From the corner booth, one of the bodyguards shifted. He had noticed the interaction, noticed that his charge was not just lucid but happy. Ruby would later wonder if that was the moment everything changed, the moment she stopped being invisible, the moment she caught the attention of forces far beyond her understanding or control. But in that instant, all she knew was that she had made an old woman smile, had brought her grandmother's friend a moment of peace. It seemed like a small thing. It was everything. The next Thursday began like any other. Ruby worked the morning shift, dealing with the usual mix of graveyard casino workers grabbing breakfast before bed and tourists who had wandered off the strip looking for cheaper food. The lunch rush came and went. By 2 o'clock, the diner had settled into its afternoon lull. Mr. Jenkins was in his office, presumably doing the books, but more likely sleeping off his liquid lunch. Candy and Crystal huddled by the register, gossiping about dealers and boyfriends and which casinos were hiring. Ruby wiped down the counter for the third time and tried not to think about the fact that she was 24 years old and this was her life. The bell chimed. Pearl Diamond entered, right on schedule, escorted by the same 2 bodyguards. But today there was something different, an air of occasion. Pearl wore a different dress, emerald green silk that probably cost more than Ruby made in 6 months. She seemed more present, more focused, and she was talking to someone on a cell phone, her voice carrying across the diner. Yes, darling, I'm here, at my usual place. No, I don't need, yes, I know you worry, but I'm perfectly, oh. She paused, listening, and her face fell slightly. Of course, if you must. Yes, I'll wait. She ended the call and looked at Ruby with an expression that mixed hope and trepidation. He's coming. My son. He worries too much. Ruby felt a chill run down her spine. Pearl's son. She knew who that was. Everyone in Vegas knew who that was. Ace Diamond, the king of Vegas, owner of the Diamond Palace, the largest casino resort on the Strip, controller of underground sports betting, high-stakes poker rooms, and allegedly a dozen other operations that existed in the shadows between legal and not. Ruby had seen his face on billboards and magazine covers, had heard the stories that circulated among casino workers. Some said he was ruthless. Others said he was fair. Everyone agreed he was dangerous, and he was coming here, to Lucky's Diner, because his mother liked the coffee. Ruby suddenly wished she had called in sick. 15 minutes later, the temperature in the diner seemed to drop 10 degrees. Ace Diamond didn't make an entrance so much as he simply claimed the space as his own. The door opened, he stepped through, and everything changed. He was tall, easily 6'3", with the kind of presence that made the shabby diner seem even shabbier by comparison. Dark hair silvered at the temples in a way that suggested distinction rather than age. 35, Ruby remembered from the magazines. Sharp gray eyes that took in everything and revealed nothing. A face carved from planes and angles, handsome in the way that predators are handsome. Beautiful and deadly. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Ruby's car. No tie. The top button of his crisp white shirt undone in a way that suggested casual confidence rather than carelessness. Silver cufflinks caught the light, and Ruby noticed they were designed to look like casino chips. Even the way he moved spoke of power. Controlled. Precise. A man who had never made a wasted motion in his life. Every customer in the diner stopped eating, stopped talking, simply watched. Ace Diamond ignored them all. His attention was fixed on the small woman in the corner booth. Ruby found herself holding her breath as he crossed the diner in 4 long strides and slid into the booth across from his mother. His voice, when he spoke, was deep and controlled, but Ruby could hear the frustration underneath. Mother, we've talked about this. Pearl's chin lifted in defiance. Your father liked diners, before all the fancy restaurants. Dad's been gone 10 years. Gentle but firm, the voice of someone who had said these words many times before. We've talked about this. You're getting confused again. I know exactly where I am. Pearl's voice wavered. I miss the old Vegas, the real shows. When things were... She couldn't finish. The words, like so many things, had slipped away. Ace's jaw tightened, but his voice remained patient. The doctor said the new medication would help with the memory issues. Are you taking it? I don't need medication. I need... She looked around the diner helplessly. I need things to be like they were. From her position behind the counter, Ruby watched the pain flash across Ace Diamond's face. Just for a second. Just long enough to remind her that underneath the expensive suit and the dangerous reputation, he was someone's son. Someone who was watching his mother disappear into a fog he couldn't fight. He pulled a small velvet box from his jacket pocket and set it on the table. Got you the brooch you wanted, from that estate sale you mentioned. Pearl stared at it, but didn't open it. I want to go to a show, a real show, like the old days at the Sands. The Sands was demolished 20 years ago. Ace's control was fraying. Ruby could hear it. You have the best entertainment at Diamond Palace. Remember? We just saw... But Pearl wasn't listening. She was staring out the window at the passing traffic, humming softly. The same song from before. The lady is a tramp. Ace stood abruptly, clearly recognizing a battle he couldn't win. He pulled out his wallet and dropped $200 bills on the table with the kind of casual gesture that spoke of unlimited resources. Slate will drive you home when you're ready. He turned to leave and his eyes swept across the diner one final time. They passed over Ruby without pausing, and she felt a strange mix of relief and disappointment. Then he was gone, the door closing behind him with a finality that felt like the end of something. Pearl watched him leave through the window. A single tear traced down her carefully powdered cheek. Ruby found herself moving before she fully realized what she was doing. She grabbed a fresh napkin and a glass of water and crossed to Pearl's booth, sliding in across from her with the same gentle manner she had used with Stella. He loves you very much, Miss Pearl. Anyone can see that. Pearl's focus shifted to her, and for a moment the confusion cleared. He does, but he doesn't understand. He tries so hard to protect me, but he can't protect me from this. She tapped her temple. From losing myself piece by piece. My grandmother had the same thing. Alzheimer's. The early stages. Did she forget you? Sometimes, but I learned that it didn't matter if she remembered my name. What mattered was making her feel safe, feel loved, feel like herself even when herself was hard to find. Pearl reached across the table and gripped Ruby's hand with surprising strength. What did you do to make her feel like herself? Ruby smiled. I sang to her, the old songs, the ones from her showgirl days. And sometimes when she was having a really good day, I'd ask her to teach me the moves. The moves? From the shows, the choreography, the grace. Ruby stood up, checking quickly to make sure the diner was still mostly empty. Candy and Crystal had disappeared into the kitchen. Mr. Jenkins's office door remained closed. The 2 bodyguards watched but didn't move. Ruby took a breath and did something she hadn't done since Stella died. She lifted her arms in the classic showgirl pose, head tilted just so, back straight, one leg slightly extended. Then humming "The Lady is a Tramp," she did a few steps of vintage choreography, nothing improper, just pure elegance, the kind of movement that belonged to a Vegas that no longer existed. Pearl Diamond's face transformed, the confusion vanished, the sadness lifted. She began to clap, her face radiant with joy. Yes, just like that. Oh, honey, you have the gift. You have the real gift. In the corner booth, both bodyguards stiffened. One of them pulled out his phone and began typing rapidly. Ruby would later understand that this was the second moment. The moment when being noticed became something else entirely. The moment she stopped being invisible and became visible to the most dangerous man in Las Vegas. But right then, in that shabby diner with the flickering neon and the burnt coffee smell, all she knew was that she had made Pearl smile. Really, truly smile. It felt like magic. It felt like the old Vegas Stella had always described. It felt like the beginning of something that could not be stopped. The following Tuesday, Ruby noticed the changes. Mr. Jenkins, who had never said a kind word to her in 3 years of employment, suddenly became almost obsequious. He asked if she was comfortable with her schedule, if she needed any time off, if there was anything at all he could do to make her job easier. Candy and Crystal stopped gossiping around her. They would fall silent when she approached, watching her with a mix of fear and fascination. The tips improved dramatically. Regulars who usually left $1 or $2 started leaving fives and tens, with nervous smiles, with careful politeness. Word had spread, Ruby Stone was under diamond protection, and protection meant Ace Diamond himself, because he was always there now. Every shift Ruby worked, there he was. Not with his mother, though Pearl continued her Tuesday and Thursday visits. No, Ace came alone. He would take the back corner booth, order black coffee he barely touched, and conduct business via phone and laptop, while his gray eyes periodically lifted to track Ruby's movements across the diner floor. He never spoke to her directly, never acknowledged her beyond the briefest nod when she refilled his coffee. But his presence was constant, and it changed everything. Slate, the head bodyguard, a massive man with a scar on his jaw and military bearing, actually started drinking the coffee Ruby brought him. Before, he had simply let it go cold. Now he would nod his thanks. Cash, the other regular bodyguard, younger and more volatile, began leaving $20 tips on a $2 coffee. The message was clear. Ruby Stone mattered to the Diamond family. She should have been terrified. Part of her was. But another part, the part that had watched her grandmother waste away and her dreams defer year after year, felt something else, something dangerous. Hope. 2 weeks after the showgirl performance, on a quiet Wednesday evening, when the dinner rush had faded and the diner stood nearly empty, the bell above the door chimed. Slate walked in alone. Ruby's heart began to pound. This was different. This broke the pattern. "Miss Stone." Slate's voice was surprisingly cultured for a man who looked like he could break concrete with his bare hands. "I need to speak with you privately." Mr. Jenkins appeared from the back office with suspicious speed, his face pale. Of course. Ruby, take your time. No rush at all." He practically ran back to his office. Slate gestured to an empty booth. Ruby slid in, her hands suddenly damp with nervous sweat. "Is Miss Pearl all right?" "She's fine, ma'am." Slate's scarred face remained professionally neutral. "Mr. Diamond would like to request your presence this evening. He's hosting a private dinner for his mother and would be honored if you would join them." Request, such a polite word. Ruby had lived in Vegas long enough to understand the reality. When you say request, in Mr. Diamond's world, requests and requirements are generally the same thing. Slate's voice remained even, but his eyes held something that might have been sympathy. "However, I should be clear. He genuinely means you no harm. This is about his mother, about making her happy." Ruby looked out the window at the black Cadillac Escalade idling at the curb. Bulletproof glass, armor plating, the kind of vehicle that screamed money and danger in equal measure. "If I say no, then I drive away and we never speak of this again." Slate paused. "But Miss Pearl asks about you every visit. She wants to see you, to talk to you, and Mr. Diamond, he would very much like to discuss a business proposition that might be mutually beneficial." Business proposition, Yale tuition, the dream that lived in the shoebox. Ruby thought of her grandmother, of the way Stella's eyes had lit up when she talked about the old shows, the magic, the beauty, the sense that life could be more than just survival. "All right." The word came out steadier than she felt. "Let me get my things." She untied her apron, hung it on the hook in the kitchen, and grabbed her worn denim jacket from her locker. No purse. She hadn't brought one. The rhinestone earrings caught the light as she closed the locker door. Stella seemed to whisper in her memory, "Sometimes you have to take a chance, baby girl. Sometimes you have to believe in magic." The Escalade's interior smelled of leather and money. Ruby's worn sneakers looked absurd against the plush carpeting. The windows were tinted so dark that once Slate closed the door, the outside world simply ceased to exist. They drove for 25 minutes, and Ruby watched the landscape change through the darkened glass. Working-class neighborhoods gave way to chain restaurants, gave way to the glittering lights of the Strip. The Diamond Palace rose above it all like a monument to excess. 50 stories of glass and steel and pure architectural ambition. Millions of lights turned it into a beacon visible from space. The resort covered an entire city block and probably generated more revenue in a day than most businesses saw in a year. But Slate didn't take her to the public entrance with its fountains and valet stands and tourists clutching cameras. Instead, he pulled into an unmarked garage entrance. Security cameras tracked their progress. Gates opened silently. They descended into the private parking structure that held vehicles worth more than Ruby's entire life. A private elevator. Slate pressed his palm to a biometric scanner. The elevator rose so smoothly Ruby barely felt the motion. 59 floors up, the doors opened directly into a penthouse that defied description. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked all of Las Vegas spread out like a glittering circuit board. The living room alone was larger than Ruby's entire apartment building. White leather furniture. Modern art that was probably worth millions. A gas fireplace that provided ambiance without heat in the perpetual desert air conditioning. But what caught Ruby's attention, what made her breath stop in her throat, were the display cases. Vintage showgirl costumes preserved behind glass, elaborate headdresses dripping with feathers and rhinestones, sequined bodices that caught the light and threw it back in dazzling patterns, costumes from the Sands, the Tropicana, the Stardust, all the great hotels that had been demolished to make way for the new Vegas, and photographs, black and white images of showgirls in their prime, beautiful women frozen in moments of grace and glamour. Ruby recognized some of the venues, some of the styles. This was her grandmother's world, preserved like a museum. He collects them. The voice came from across the room, and Ruby turned to find Ace Diamond standing by the windows, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. Whiskey, she guessed. Probably older than she was. He had changed from the business suit. Now he wore black slacks and a white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled to his forearms. It should have made him look more casual. Instead, it somehow made him look more dangerous. The costumes, Ace continued, his voice measured and controlled, and the photographs, and the chips, and the programs, and anything else I can save from the Vegas that used to exist. Before, we tore it all down to build bigger boxes with more slot machines. Ruby found her voice. They're beautiful. They're ghosts. He took a sip of his whiskey, but sometimes ghosts are all we have left. Before Ruby could respond, Pearl Diamond swept into the room, and the transformation was remarkable. She wore a vintage sequined dress that probably dated to the 1970s. Real jewelry glittered at her throat and wrists. Her hair was styled in an elaborate updo. And most importantly, her eyes were clear, focused, present. "Ruby! Oh, darling, you came!" She pulled Ruby into a hug that smelled of Chanel No. 5 and hairspray, and for just a moment, Ruby felt like she was hugging Stella. "Ace, isn't she lovely? She reminds me so much of the girls from the real shows, the ones who had grace, not just bodies." Ace's gray eyes settled on Ruby with an intensity that made her acutely aware of her cheap jacket and worn sneakers. "She does seem to have a certain quality." His voice was neutral, but something in his gaze was not. "Please, Miss Stone, have a seat. Make yourself comfortable." Comfortable. In a penthouse that probably cost more per month than she made in a year, with a woman suffering from dementia and the most dangerous man in Las Vegas. Sure, comfortable. But Ruby sat in the white leather chair and tried to pretend her heart wasn't trying to hammer its way out of her chest. Dinner was served in a formal dining room that belonged in a museum. Crystal chandelier. Original artwork. A table that could seat 20 but was set for 3. Silent staff in black uniforms moved like shadows, serving courses that Ruby couldn't even name. Prime rib that melted like butter. Lobster prepared in ways she had never imagined. Sides that were small works of art on pristine white plates. Wine that probably cost more per bottle than her monthly rent. But what surprised Ruby most was the conversation. Pearl was lucid, sharp even. She talked about the old shows with crystalline detail. The choreography, the costumes, the feeling of being on stage under the lights, with hundreds of eyes watching. "You can't imagine what it was like," Pearl said, her eyes distant with memory. "Walking out in those costumes, feeling the weight of the headdress, hearing the orchestra. For those moments, you weren't just a girl from nowhere. You were magic itself." "My grandmother talked about it the same way," Ruby said softly. "She said it was like being part of something bigger than yourself, something that mattered." Stella understood. Pearl reached across the table and squeezed Ruby's hand. She was one of the ones who had it, the real gift. Not just beauty, though she had that too, but the ability to make people believe, to make them forget their lives for just a little while and believe in magic. Ace listened in silence, his dinner barely touched, his attention fixed on his mother with an intensity that spoke of both love and desperation. When Pearl excused herself after dessert, claiming fatigue but doing so with a smile Ruby had never seen before, Ace walked his mother to her suite with gentle care. He returned alone, and suddenly the vast penthouse felt very small. He poured himself another whiskey and stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at his kingdom. She's been in decline for 3 years. His voice was quiet, controlled, but Ruby could hear the pain underneath. Since my father died, sometimes I think the dementia is just her mind's way of escaping to a time when he was still alive, when things made sense. Ruby stayed in her chair, uncertain what to say. What could she possibly say to this man who owned half of Vegas but couldn't save his mother from her own mind? The doctors tried new medications, new therapies. Nothing works for long. He turned to face her, and in that moment, with his guard down and his pain visible, he looked less like the king of Vegas and more like a lost son. But you made her smile, really smile, for the first time in months, years maybe. I just reminded her of something she loved. No. Ace moved closer, and Ruby felt the temperature in the room shift. You gave her back a piece of herself. You reached her in a place I can't reach, in the place where she's happiest. He set down his whiskey glass and pulled an envelope from a drawer in the glass and chrome desk. Heavy paper, expensive, the kind of thing that contained important documents. I have a proposition for you, Miss Stone. A business proposition. Ruby's mouth went dry. I'm listening. My mother needs a companion, someone who understands her world, someone who can reach her when she gets lost. He set the envelope on the coffee table between them. You're wasted at that diner. Your talents, your understanding of the entertainment world, your ability to connect with her, all of it is wasted serving coffee to tourists. I'm a waitress, Mr. Diamond. I'm not qualified to. You made her smile. He cut her off with quiet intensity. You made her feel like herself. That's the only qualification that matters. Ruby stared at the envelope. What exactly are you proposing? Full-time companion for my mother. You would live here in the guest suite. My security team would protect you both. You would accompany her to museums, shows, anywhere she wants to go. You would sing the old songs with her. Teach her the dances when she's having good days. Be there when the confusion gets bad. It sounded reasonable, almost too reasonable. And in exchange? Ace's gray eyes locked onto hers with laser focus. Yale. Ruby's breath caught. Yale School of Drama. Theater design program. I looked into your background, Miss Stone. Not difficult in this city. Everyone's running from something or towards something. You're running toward something. I respect that. He pushed the envelope closer. Full tuition, room and board, supplies, everything. Consider it a signing bonus. For 1 year of... Ruby couldn't finish, couldn't process what he was offering. 1 year as my mother's companion. Then you're freed to go to Connecticut and study theater design and never think about Vegas again. He paused. Though something tells me Vegas gets in your blood, people who really belong here never quite leave. Ruby picked up the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a contract, professionally prepared, detailed, and clipped to it, a letter of acceptance from Yale School of Drama. How did you... I make things happen, Miss Stone. It's what I do. There was no arrogance in his voice. Just statement of fact. You have the grades, the portfolio, the recommendations from your community college professors. Yale just needed a reason to take a chance on someone without money or connections. I provided that reason. Ruby looked up from the papers, and for the first time, really looked at Ace Diamond. Not as the king of Vegas, not as the dangerous casino owner, but as a man who was offering her everything she had ever wanted. The question came out as a whisper. You could hire professional caregivers, nurses with dementia training, people actually qualified for this. Ace moved closer, and Ruby found herself looking up into those gray eyes that seemed to see through every defense she had ever built. Because they would be employees, doing a job, following protocols. His voice dropped lower, intimate in a way that made Ruby's pulse race. But you understand. You know what it's like to watch someone you love disappear. You know how to reach them with kindness instead of pity. And you have something else. What? The gift Pearl talked about. The ability to make people believe, to create magic out of nothing. He reached out and tucked a strand of honey blonde hair behind her ear in a gesture so unexpected, so intimate, that Ruby forgot to breathe. You just stole my heart, sweetheart. The words hung in the air between them. Not a romantic declaration, a statement of fact, a claim of ownership. Ruby knew she should be terrified, should see this for what it was. A cage, gilded and beautiful in line with Yale acceptance letters, but a cage nonetheless. But all she could think about was Stella, about the magic, about the chance to live in the world her grandmother had described with such love and longing, and about the way Ace Diamond was looking at her like she was a card he intended to keep in his hand forever. 1 year, she heard herself say, and then I'm free to go to Yale. 1 year, you'll be protected, safe. No one will ever touch you. His eyes went cold as winter. And anyone who tries will learn very quickly that some things in Vegas are off limits. Ruby gripped the envelope, the contract, her future, her dream, her cage. Okay, I'll do it. Ace smiled, and it was the smile of a man who had just won a hand he had been playing all along. Smart girl. He leaned down and pressed a kiss to her forehead. Not romantic, possessive. A brand, a claim. Slate will take you to get your things tonight. You start tomorrow. As Ruby was led back to the elevator, the envelope clutched in her hands, her mind spinning with the impossibility of what had just happened. One of the papers slipped free and drifted to the floor. She bent to pick it up and froze. It was a photograph. Old, faded. A young woman in a showgirl costume, elaborate headdress and sequined bodysuit, standing with a young man in a dealer's vest. They were laughing, arms around each other, clearly in love. The woman was unmistakably a young Pearl, but the man was not Jack Diamond. Ruby turned the photo over. On the back, in faded ink, was written, Pearl and Frank, Sands Casino 1983, forever in the spotlight. She looked up at Slate, questions forming, but the bodyguard's face remained professionally blank. Mr. Diamond said you might find that, said to tell you that everyone in Vegas has secrets, and some secrets are worth keeping. The elevator doors closed, and Ruby descended from the penthouse with a contract that would change her life, an acceptance letter to her dream school, and a photograph of a mystery that would eventually threaten everything. She didn't know it yet, but she had just stepped onto a stage where the choreography was written in blood and money, where the audience was deadly, and where one wrong step could cost everything. Welcome to Vegas, the real Vegas, where magic and danger are just two sides of the same chip, and the house always, always wins. Unless you're willing to change the game entirely. Ruby Stone had just agreed to play, and in the back booth of Lucky's Diner, in the shadows where the neon didn't quite reach, someone else had been watching. Someone who remembered Pearl before she was Mrs. Diamond. Someone who had been waiting 40 years for a chance at revenge. The game was just beginning, and the stakes were higher than anyone knew. Shadows and secrets. The first morning Ruby woke up in the Diamond Palace penthouse, she thought she was dreaming. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked a city she no longer recognized. From 59 floors up, Las Vegas looked like a toy model. The Strip stretched out below like a river of glass and ambition. In the distance, the desert mountains ringed the valley in shades of purple and gold. Her suite was larger than the apartment she had shared with 3 other waitresses. 2 bedrooms, a living area with furniture that belonged in magazines, a bathroom with a shower that had more settings than her old car, and a walk-in closet that held clothes she had definitely not owned yesterday. Evening gowns in jewel tones, day dresses in soft fabrics that whispered against skin, shoes that came in boxes with Italian names, jewelry that caught in the morning light and threw rainbows across cream-colored walls. A note lay on the dresser in bold, masculine handwriting. A diamond woman should shine. Wear them well. No signature. None needed. Ruby picked up one of the dresses, a simple sheath in deep sapphire blue, and held it against herself in the mirror. The woman looking back was a stranger. Someone who belonged in this world of luxury and danger. She set the dress down carefully and reached into her worn duffel bag for the one thing she had insisted on bringing. The small velvet box that held Stella's rhinestone earrings. They looked absurd next to the real diamonds and sapphires that filled the jewelry drawer. Costume pieces next to genuine treasures. But Ruby fastened them to her ears anyway and felt more like herself. A soft knock at the door made her turn. Pearl stood in the doorway, wearing a vintage dressing gown that probably cost more than Ruby used to make in a month. But more importantly, she was smiling. Present. Here. Good morning, dear. I hope you slept well. I thought perhaps we could have breakfast together, and then I could show you my old costumes. The real ones I kept. Would you like that? Ruby found herself smiling back. I would like that very much, Miss Pearl. Please, just Pearl. We're going to be friends, aren't we? Real friends? And somehow, impossibly, they were. The first 6 weeks passed in a blur of routine and discovery. Mornings were spent with Pearl, and Ruby learned that the dementia followed patterns. Good days when Pearl was sharp and present, able to discuss the old shows with crystal clarity. Bad days when she got lost in her own penthouse and called Ruby by names of showgirls long dead. And the in-between days, which were somehow hardest, when Pearl knew she was forgetting but couldn't stop it from happening. On the good days, they watched old recordings of Vegas shows from the Golden Age. Pearl would stand and demonstrate the choreography, her body remembering what her mind sometimes couldn't. Ruby learned the steps, the grace, the precise movements that had made Vegas entertainment legendary. It's all about the illusion, Pearl explained during one particularly lucid morning, making people believe that this moment, this performance, is the most important thing in the world. That's the real magic, not the feathers or the sequins, the belief. They took drives to the Neon Museum, where old casino signs went to tea in glorious rusting splendor. Pearl would touch the faded letters and remember the hotels they had adorned, the Stardust, the Dunes, the sands where she had once performed. They tore them all down, she said softly during one visit, her fingers trailing across a sign from the Tropicana. Built bigger boxes, more efficient, but they lost something. They lost the soul. Ruby understood. She'd grown up hearing Stella talk about the same loss, the death of magic in favor of profit margins. Slate and cash accompanied them everywhere, silent shadows in expensive suits. But they began to treat Ruby differently, with respect rather than mere tolerance. Slate actually smiled once when Ruby successfully calmed Pearl during a confused episode in a costume shop. "You're good at this," he said simply. The boss chose well. The boss, Ace Diamond, was everywhere and nowhere. Ruby would catch glimpses of him leaving for the casino floor in the early afternoon, dressed in suits that looked like they had been tailored by artists. She would hear his voice late at night, talking business in his office down the hall. Sometimes she would find him on the balcony at dawn, smoking a cigarette and staring at his kingdom with eyes that revealed nothing. But he never spoke to her directly, never acknowledged her beyond the briefest nod when they passed in the hallway. It should have been a relief. Instead, Ruby found herself watching for him, listening for his voice. Aware of his presence, even when he was floors away running an empire built on calculated risk and iron control. The penthouse staff treated her with careful courtesy. The chef asked her preferences. The housekeeper learned how she liked her coffee. Even the security team began to relax around her, though their eyes never stopped scanning for threats. Ruby Stone, waitress from nowhere, had become part of the Diamond household, and she had no idea how dangerous that really was. It happened on a Tuesday evening, 6 weeks after Ruby had moved into the penthouse. She had spent the day with Pearl at a vintage clothing auction, helping her bid on costumes from old Vegas shows. Pearl had been having a good day, sharp and engaged, telling stories about performers Ruby had only read about in books. By the time they returned to the penthouse, the sun was setting over the desert, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that seemed impossible. Pearl retired to her suite, tired but happy, and Ruby found herself alone on the balcony, sketching the view. Yale had sent her preliminary coursework, theater design fundamentals. She was supposed to be studying perspective and lighting. Instead, she found herself drawing the old Sands Casino from memory, recreating the building that had been demolished before she was born, based entirely on Pearl's descriptions and faded photographs. "You see beauty in ghosts." The voice came from directly behind her, and Ruby jumped, her pencil skittering across the paper. Ace stood in the doorway to the balcony, still wearing his work clothes, charcoal slacks, white shirt with the sleeves rolled to his forearms. His jacket and tie had been discarded somewhere, and he looked more human than she had ever seen him. More dangerous, too. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to startle you." He moved to the railing, keeping a careful distance. "My mother had a good day." "She did. She was wonderful at the auction, sharp, engaged. She knew every costume, every show they came from. Because of you." Ace pulled a silver cigarette case from his pocket, then paused. "Do you mind? It's your balcony. It's your home, for now." He lit the cigarette with a matching silver lighter and smoke curled into the desert air. "She's been having more good days since you arrived," the doctors noticed. "They're calling it remarkable progress." Ruby set down her sketchbook. "I'm not doing anything special. Just listening. Remembering with her." "You're doing everything special." Ace turned to look at her directly, and the intensity in his gray eyes made her breath catch. "You gave her back a piece of herself. I've thrown money at specialists and medications and therapies. Nothing worked. Then you show up and sing Sinatra, and suddenly she's herself again. It's not me. It's the connection to what she loves. It's you." He moved closer, and Ruby found herself backed against the railing with nowhere to go. "You have something the professionals don't have. You actually care. Not because I'm paying you. because you understand what it's like to lose someone piece by piece. The space between them felt electric, dangerous. Mr. Diamond, Ace, his voice dropped lower. We're past formalities, don't you think? You live in my house. You care for my mother. You've become part of this family whether you intended to or not. I'm an employee. No. He reached out and touched her face, his fingers gentle against her cheek. You're something else entirely. Something I didn't plan for. Something that's making this much more complicated than it should be. Ruby's heart hammered against her ribs. What are you saying? I'm saying that I've been in the dark a long time, since my father was killed. Maybe even before that. Building walls, keeping everyone at a distance. His thumb traced her jawline. And then you walk into my life with your grandmother's rhinestone earrings and your kindness and your understanding of magic. And suddenly the walls don't seem as necessary. Ace, she didn't know if it was a protest or a plea. He leaned in and Ruby thought he was going to kiss her. Expected it, wanted it, despite every rational thought screaming that this was a terrible idea. Instead, he pressed his forehead against hers, his eyes closed, his breathing unsteady. You're the first real thing I've seen in years. The first thing that's not an angle or a play or a calculation. They stood like that, balanced on the edge of something that would change everything, while Vegas glittered below them and the desert wind carried the scent of smoke and possibility. Then Ace pulled back, his control reasserting itself like a wall slamming down. Good night, Ruby. Thank you for today. For every day. He was gone before she could respond, leaving her alone on the balcony with her racing heart and the taste of might have been hanging in the air. Ruby looked down at her sketchbook. The drawing of the sands had been ruined by her startled pencil stroke. A dark line cut across the building's facade like a scar. Some things, once broken, could never be quite the same. She was beginning to understand that she might be one of them. The kiss, when it finally happened, was inevitable. 2 months into her stay at Diamond Palace on a cool November evening when the desert finally released its stranglehold of heat, Ruby and Pearl had spent the day sorting through old costumes in the storage unit Ace maintained. Pearl had been having an exceptional day, clear, present, full of stories about the performers she had known and the shows that had defined an era. They had laughed together over elaborate headdresses and sequined costumes that weighed more than seemed possible. By the time they returned to the penthouse, Pearl was tired but glowing with happiness. She kissed Ruby's cheek and retired early, humming Fly Me to the Moon as she disappeared into her suite. Ruby found herself on the balcony again, drawn by the view and the cool air and the need to process the strange new life she was living. She had started a new sketch. Not the sands this time, the Diamond Palace itself, but redesigned as it might have looked in the Golden Age. Art Deco lines instead of modern glass. Elegance instead of efficiency. You're trying to fix Vegas. Ace's voice no longer startled her. She had grown accustomed to his presence, the way he moved through the penthouse like smoke, there and gone and always watching. I'm trying to imagine what it could have been, should have been. He came to stand beside her at the railing, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body in the cool desert night. My father used to say that nostalgia is just another form of gambling, betting that the past was better than the present. Was he right? He was right about most things, including the fact that you can't go backward, only forward. Ace turned to face her, but sometimes forward feels like falling. Ruby set down her sketchbook and met his eyes. Are you falling, Ace? I've been falling since the moment you danced for my mother in that diner. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the gesture now familiar. I told myself this was about her, about giving her companionship and care. I told myself I could keep this professional, controlled. And now? Now I can't stop thinking about you, can't stop watching for you, can't stop wanting. He trailed off, jaw tightening with the effort of maintaining control. Ruby knew she should step back, should remind him of the contract, the professional boundaries, the fact that she was leaving for Yale in 10 months. Instead, she stepped closer. What do you want, Ace? His control shattered. He pulled her against him and kissed her with the kind of intensity that erased thought. His hands tangled in her hair. Her fingers gripped his shirt. The city lights blurred around them as the world narrowed to this moment. This connection, this impossible thing that was happening despite every reason it shouldn't. The kiss tasted of whiskey and smoke and loneliness that mirrored her own. It felt like falling and flying at the same time. Like magic and danger wrapped together so tightly, they became the same thing. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Ace kept his forehead pressed against hers. You're mine now. You understand that? Ruby should have protested, should have reminded him that she was her own person, that the contract had an end date, that this was temporary. But the word that came out was simply, yes. And with that single syllable, everything changed. From that night forward, Ruby was no longer just Pearl's companion. She was Ace Diamond's, in ways that went far beyond any contract or arrangement. He didn't announce it, didn't need to. The household staff simply knew. Slayton Cash began treating her with the kind of deference reserved for family. The penthouse chef started asking what both she and Ace would prefer for dinner, and Ace himself became more present. Not just glimpses and passing nods. He would join them for breakfast with Pearl, would ask about Ruby's Yale coursework, would find her on the balcony in the evenings and talk about everything and nothing while the city glittered below. But the happiness was threaded with tension Ruby couldn't quite name. More security appeared. 12 men on the penthouse floor instead of 6. Slate's face grew more serious. Cash started carrying a second weapon that Ruby wasn't supposed to notice but did. When she asked Ace about it, he simply said, "Riverlock is making moves. Nothing you need to worry about." But the name hung in the air like smoke. Riverlock, downtown casino owner, rival, enemy. Ruby had heard the stories from the household staff, whispered conversations about territory disputes and old grudges, and a sister who had died at Diamond Palace 15 years ago. The undercurrent of danger that had always existed in Ace's world was rising to the surface, and Ruby was standing at the center of it, marked as his, which made her a target in ways she was only beginning to understand. The photograph fell into Ruby's hands by accident. She had been looking for an old show program Pearl had mentioned, something from a Sands production in 1982. Pearl's memory had been fuzzy, and Ruby wanted to surprise her by finding it. The storage unit held decades of memorabilia. Ruby searched carefully through boxes of programs and photographs, trying not to disturb the careful organization someone had created. That's when she found the letters. They were tied with a red satin ribbon, the kind used in showgirl costumes. The bundle had been tucked into a box of photographs from the early 1980s. Ruby almost put them back unopened. But one of the envelopes had come loose, and she could see the handwriting. Masculine, bold, full of passion even in the shape of the letters. Before she could stop herself, Ruby pulled the letter free and began to read. "My dearest Pearl, I can't shuffle another deck without thinking of you. Your manager can't keep us apart. I'll wait backstage Thursday after the last show. We'll run to California, get married, build a life away from all of this. Together forever. All my love, Frank." Frank. Ruby's hands began to shake. She pulled out another letter, then another. They told a story of desperate love between a showgirl and a card dealer. Plans to elope, fury at Pearl's father who forbade the relationship, and then, in the later letters, devastation. The handwriting became more jagged, the words more bitter. "Why did you choose him? You swore you loved me. Now you're marrying Jack Diamond, and I hope his casino makes you happy while I bleed out in this dealer pit." The final letter was dated 1984, a year after Pearl's marriage. "They destroyed me, your father and Jack Diamond, blacklisted me from every casino on the Strip. 3 years working my way up, and it's all gone. They left me with one pathetic diner off Fremont. Lucky's, they call it. I should be grateful," they said. "Grateful to serve eggs to the people who stole my life. I hope you remember me, Pearl, when you're living in your penthouse. I hope you remember what we could have been. Lucky's Diner, Frank." Ruby's mind raced, connecting pieces she hadn't known were part of the same puzzle. Frank Sullivan, the owner of Lucky's Diner who was rarely there, but whose name appeared on the paperwork. The man who had lost everything to the Diamond family 40 years ago. The man in the photograph Ruby had found on her first night here. The one labeled, "Pearl and Frank, Sands Casino 1983, forever in the spotlight." Pearl's first love wasn't just a memory. He was real, present, running the diner where Pearl insisted on having coffee every Tuesday and Thursday. Ruby's stomach turned as the implications crashed over her. Pearl went to that diner to see him, even if she couldn't always remember why. Even if the dementia confused the past and present. Some part of her remembered Frank Sullivan and kept pulling her back to him. And Frank, bitter and broken after 40 years, was still there, still watching, still remembering. Ruby carefully photographed several of the letters with her phone, then returned everything to its place. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely tie the ribbon. She needed to talk to someone about this, needed to understand what it meant. But who could she trust? Ace? He would see this as a threat to his mother. Slate? His loyalty was to Ace, not to her. Pearl herself? On her good days, maybe, but the dementia made it impossible to know which version of Pearl would answer. Ruby locked the storage unit and rode back to the penthouse in silence, the weight of the discovery pressing down on her chest like a stone. When she entered the penthouse, she found Ace in his office, surrounded by papers and looking more stressed than she had ever seen him. He looked up when she entered, and his expression softened slightly. "How was your day with Mother?" "Good, she had a clear day. We looked through old costumes." "Good, that's good." But his attention was already drifting back to the papers. "I'm sorry, I have to deal with this. Locke is making another move, and I need to—" "It's fine, I understand." Ruby retreated to her room, the letters burning in her mind like a brand. She wanted to tell Ace, should tell Ace, but something held her back. Maybe it was the way Pearl's eyes lit up when she talked about the old days. Maybe it was the profound sadness in those old letters. Maybe it was Ruby's own understanding of how love could survive decades of hurt and betrayal. Or maybe it was the growing realization that she was trapped in a story that had started long before she arrived, and the ending had already been written in ways she couldn't yet see. That night, Ruby dreamed of showgirls dancing in an empty casino, while a dealer shuffled cards that turned to ash in his hands, and a woman in a beautiful cage sang songs that nobody could hear. The invitation arrived on a cold December morning, delivered by courier in an envelope so heavy it felt like it contained more than just paper. Ruby found it on the breakfast table, propped against her coffee cup. Ace and Pearl had already finished eating. Pearl had returned to her suite for her morning medication. Ace stood by the windows, phone pressed to his ear, his voice low and tense. Ruby opened the envelope carefully. Inside was an invitation to the Diamond Palace Annual Gala, a charity event during the World Series of Poker that attracted every major player in Vegas, politicians, celebrities, and every casino owner in the city, including River Locke. Clipped to the invitation was a note in Ace's bold handwriting. "You'll need a gown. Slate will take you shopping. This is important. Everyone will be watching." Ruby's hands tightened on the paper as the implications settled over her. This wasn't just a party. This was a declaration. Ace was going to present her to Vegas society as his, to mark her publicly as under diamond protection, to paint a target on her back that every enemy he had would see. She looked up to find Ace watching her, phone call finished, his expression unreadable. "You don't have to go. I can make an excuse. But you want me there. I want everyone to see that you're under my protection. That touching you means declaring war on me." His jaw tightened. Locke will be there, and he needs to understand that some things are off limits. By making me a target? By making you untouchable? Ace crossed to her and took her hands. "I know this isn't what you signed up for. The contract was supposed to be simple. Care for my mother, get your education, move on with your life. But things changed. Everything changed." He lifted her hand to his lips. "I changed. And now I need the city to know that you matter to me, that you're not just an employee or a companion, that you're mine." The possessiveness in his voice should have frightened her, should have triggered every instinct to run. Instead, Ruby found herself saying, "What should I wear?" The smile that crossed Ace's face was equal parts relief and something darker. Victory, perhaps, or the satisfaction of a gambler who had just won a crucial hand. Whatever makes you feel like a queen, because that's what you'll be, at least for one night. 3 days later, Ruby stood in front of a mirror in a gown that cost more than her entire previous year's salary. Deep ruby red, the color of her name, and of blood, and of the chips that meant highest stakes on a casino floor. The dress was vintage Hollywood glamour, the kind of elegance that would have been at home in the Sands or the Tropicana during their glory days. Fitted bodice, flowing skirt, a back cut low enough to be daring without crossing into improper. Fabric that caught light and held it, making her seem to glow, and at her throat, a necklace that made her breath stop. Diamonds, real ones, probably worth more than most people's houses. An heirloom piece that Ace had presented to her with careful ceremony, fastening the clasp himself while his fingers brushed the nape of her neck in a way that made her shiver. "My grandmother wore this," he had said quietly, "when she married my grandfather, when the Diamond family was just starting to become something in this city." "Ace, I can't." "You can, you will." His hands on her shoulders, his eyes meeting hers in the mirror. "Tonight, you're not Ruby Stone from nowhere. You're a diamond, and that means something in this city." Now, looking at her reflection, Ruby barely recognized herself. Her honey blonde hair had been styled in elegant waves, makeup subtle but perfect, the dress and jewelry transforming her into someone who belonged in this world of luxury and danger. Pearl appeared in the doorway wearing emerald green and looking more lucid than she had in days. Oh, honey, you look just like the girls from the real shows. The ones who had class, not just beauty. She came forward and adjusted the diamond necklace slightly. Ace's grandmother would have loved you. She understood that true elegance comes from here. Pearl touched Ruby's heart. Not from what you're wearing. I'm scared, Pearl. Good, you should be. Pearl's voice was suddenly sharp, present in a way that showed the intelligence dementia hadn't yet stolen. My son is painting a target on you tonight, making you visible in a world where visibility is dangerous. But he's also offering you his protection. And in Vegas, diamond protection means something. What if it's not enough? Then you do what showgirls have always done. You smile, you dance, you make them believe the magic, and you survive. The limousine ride to the Diamond Palace felt surreal. Ruby sat between Ace and Pearl, watching the strip blur past in ribbons of neon and light. Ace wore a tuxedo that made him look like he had stepped out of a film about sophisticated criminals. Pearl glowed in her emerald dress, having one of her increasingly rare perfect days. And in the front seat, Slate and Cash were armed and alert, their eyes constantly scanning for threats. The Diamond Palace ballroom had been transformed into something from old Vegas dreams. Crystal chandeliers, gold accents, tables set with precision, a stage where a jazz quartet played standards from the Rat Pack era. And everywhere, people who mattered in Vegas. Politicians whose campaigns Ace probably funded, judges who owed him favors, casino owners who were either allies or enemies with nothing in between. Ruby felt every eye in the room track their entrance. Ace kept his hand on her waist, possessive and protective. Pearl glided through the crowd with the grace of a woman who had spent decades performing, and Ruby tried to remember how to breathe. That's when she saw him. River Locke. He stood across the ballroom, champagne in hand, surrounded by his own people. Tall, blonde, younger than Ace by a few years. Handsome in a way that probably made people underestimate him. And when his cold blue eyes found Ruby, he smiled. It was the smile of a shark who had just spotted prey. Ace's hand tightened on her waist. Stay close to me. Don't leave my sight. And if he approaches you, don't engage. Ace, I mean it, Ruby. River Locke is not a man who plays by rules. He's looking for weakness. And you? His voice dropped. You're the first weakness I've shown in years. The evening passed in a blur of introductions and careful conversations. Ruby smiled, shook hands, played the part of Ace Diamond's woman with a grace she didn't know she possessed. But all the while, she felt River Locke watching. During the band's break, Ruby excused herself for air. Ace started to follow, but a city councilman caught him with an urgent question. Slate moved to accompany Ruby, but she shook her head. I'm just going to the balcony. You can see me from the door. It was a mistake. She knew it the moment she stepped outside and heard the door close behind her with too much finality. River Locke was already there, leaning against the railing like he had been waiting for her. Miss Stone, or should I say Miss Diamond? His voice was smooth, educated, dangerous in its pleasantness. You look lovely tonight, like something from the old Vegas Ace is so obsessed with preserving. Ruby's heart hammered, but she kept her voice steady. Mr. Locke, you should leave. Ace wouldn't want. Ace wants to keep you in a beautiful cage. I can see that. River moved closer, and Ruby resisted the urge to step back. But cages are cages, no matter how pretty, and Ace Diamond is very good at building cages. What do you want? To help you. He pulled out a business card and pressed it into her hand. Before you get hurt, because people around Ace Diamond have a way of getting hurt, like my sister did 15 years ago. Ruby felt her breath catch. Your sister? Jade. She was 19, came to Diamond Palace for a friend's bachelorette party, ended up drugged and dead in one of the hotel rooms. River's pleasant mask slipped, showing real pain beneath. Diamond security covered it up, called it an accidental overdose. But I know the truth. This place kills innocents. I'm sorry about your sister, but that doesn't... It means that Ace Diamond builds his empire on broken people, and you're just the latest. River's hand touched the diamond necklace at her throat. Pretty chains, Miss Stone, but still chains. Run to Yale while you still can, because if you stay, you'll end up like everyone else who gets too close to the king. Used up and discarded when you stop being useful. Ruby! Ace's voice cut across the balcony like a whip crack. The door burst open. Ace stood there, and Ruby had never seen him look so dangerous. Slate and Cash flanked him, hands inside their jackets. River didn't flinch, just smiled that shark smile again. Just making introductions, Diamond. Your lady and I were discussing old Vegas and new opportunities. Get away from her now. River stepped back, hands raised in mock surrender. Easy. I meant no disrespect. His eyes found Ruby's one more time. Think about what I said, Miss Stone. Yale is waiting, and this city eats people like you alive. He strolled past Ace and back into the ballroom, leaving Ruby shaking and Ace looking like murder. Ace crossed to her in 3 strides and grabbed her shoulders. What did he say to you? What did he want? He told me to run. He told me about his sister. Ruby's voice broke. He touched the necklace. Something in Ace snapped. He pulled her against him and kissed her in front of everyone who had stepped onto the balcony to watch. Not gentle, not sweet, possessive, claiming. A kiss that told everyone watching exactly who Ruby belonged to. When he pulled back, his forehead pressed against hers, his breathing ragged. You're not going anywhere. You understand me? Nowhere. Ace, he touches you, he touches me. He threatens you, he declares war. Ace's voice was low and lethal, and I'm very good at war. He pulled her back inside, past staring faces and whispered conversations, and Ruby understood with crystalline clarity that she had just become the most visible piece on a game board she didn't fully understand. The target was painted, the lines were drawn, and somewhere in the shadows of old Vegas, someone else was watching. Someone who had been waiting 40 years for an opportunity exactly like this. The game was accelerating toward a conclusion that would break hearts and shatter lives. And Ruby Stone, waitress turned diamond, was standing at the center of a storm she had never seen coming. But the worst was yet to come. Because that night, when Ruby finally returned to her suite, exhausted and overwhelmed, she would make a discovery that would change everything. She would find Pearl's private phone, and she would see a call log that showed dozens of conversations with a single number. A number that, when Ruby dialed it from her own phone, would be answered by a gravelly voice saying simply, Lucky's Diner. Frank Sullivan. Pearl had been talking to Frank Sullivan, and Ruby would finally understand that the real danger had been inside the cage all along. War and redemption. The phone felt like it was burning in Ruby's hand. She sat on the edge of her bed in the pre-dawn darkness, staring at the call log that told a story she didn't want to believe. Pearl's private cell phone, the one she sometimes forgot she had, showed dozens of outgoing calls over the past 6 months, all to the same number, all to Lucky's Diner. Ruby's mind raced through the implications. Pearl's confused visits to the diner, her insistence on going there even when it made no sense. The way she would sometimes stare at nothing, humming old songs with tears in her eyes. She had been calling Frank Sullivan, talking to him. And if she was talking to him, what was she saying? Ruby thought of Ace's stress over the past weeks, the increased security, the tension that hummed through the penthouse like an electrical current. Riverlock making moves, Ace had said. But what if the threat wasn't just external? What if it had been inside the cage all along? She looked at the clock. 4:30 in the morning. Ace would be in his office. He barely slept anymore, spending his nights managing an empire that required constant vigilance. Ruby pulled on jeans and a sweater, slipped the phone into her pocket, and walked barefoot down the hall to Ace's office. The door was open. He sat behind his desk, surrounded by monitors showing various views of the casino floor. Security feeds, profit margins, the endless flow of money that kept his kingdom running. He looked up when she appeared in the doorway, and his expression immediately shifted from business to concern. Ruby, what's wrong? It's barely dawn. She crossed the office and set Pearl's phone on his desk. Look at the call log. Ace picked up the phone, his face unreadable as he scrolled through the calls. But Ruby saw the moment understanding hit, saw his jaw tighten, saw the flash of something that might have been pain before his professional mask slammed down. Frank Sullivan, his voice was flat, controlled in the way that meant he was anything but. She's been calling the owner of Lucky's Diner. Not just calling, talking to him for hours. Ace, the letters I found in storage mentioned him. He and your mother were in love before your father. They were going to run away together, but your father destroyed him, blacklisted him from every casino, left him with just the diner. I know. Ace set the phone down carefully, too carefully. My father told me the story once, said it was a lesson in how you eliminate competition before it becomes a threat. Frank Sullivan was good, very good. Could have been a problem if he'd stayed in the game. So your father ruined his life. My father protected what was his. That's how this world works, Ruby. You should understand that by now. But there was no conviction in his voice, just exhaustion. Ace, if your mother has been talking to Frank for 6 months, what has she been telling him? The question hung in the air like smoke. Ace's hands curled into fists on the desk. She has Alzheimer's. She gets confused about past and present. Sometimes she thinks my father is still alive. Sometimes she forgets where she is. His voice cracked slightly. She wouldn't intentionally betray you, I know that. But Ace, what if Frank has been asking her questions? What if he's been using her guilt about what your family did to him to get information? Ace stood abruptly and crossed to the windows overlooking Vegas. The city was just starting to wake up, the neon fading as real light touched the desert. The tournament, his voice was barely a whisper. Mother asked me about it last week. Said she wanted to make sure it would be a success. I thought she was just being supportive. I told her everything. 50 million in chips, 100 high rollers. The biggest legitimacy play Diamond Palace has ever made. Ruby felt ice slide down her spine. And she could have told Frank. And Frank could have told River Locke. Ace's reflection in the window looked like a ghost. Who would use that information to plan the biggest heist in Vegas history? The silence that followed was broken only by the soft hum of the climate control and the distant sounds of a city that never truly slept. Then Ace turned, and Ruby saw something in his eyes she had never seen before. Not the king of Vegas, not the dangerous casino owner, just a man whose world was crumbling around him. I need to talk to my mother. They found Pearl in her suite, sitting by the window and humming Fly Me to the Moon while watching the sunrise. She looked small and fragile in her vintage dressing gown, and for a moment Ruby wanted to protect her from what was coming. But Ace crossed the room with slow, deliberate steps and knelt in front of his mother's chair. Mother, I need you to tell me about Frank Sullivan. Pearl's humming stopped. Her eyes, which had been vague and distant, suddenly focused with painful clarity. Oh no, you found out. Found out what, Mother? What have you been doing? Tears began to slide down Pearl's face. I just wanted to help him. After what your father did. What my father did. They destroyed him, Tia. Ace took everything, left him with nothing but bitterness and that terrible little diner. So you called him. Ace's voice remained controlled, but Ruby could hear the strain underneath. For 6 months, you called him and talked to him. What did you tell him, Mother? Just little things. About the family, about the casino. He asked questions and I wanted to make him feel important. Feel like he mattered. Pearl gripped Ace's hands. I never meant to hurt you. I love you. You're my son. My boy. I would never. The tournament, Mother. Did you tell him about the tournament? Pearl's face crumpled. He called 2 days ago. He was upset. Said he was losing the diner. That the bank was foreclosing. And I wanted to help. So I told him not to worry. That you were doing something big. Something that would legitimize the family business. What exactly did you tell him? That there was a tournament next week, 50 million, the biggest event Diamond Palace has ever hosted. The words came out in a rush, and with each one, Ace's face grew harder. I just wanted him to know that you were succeeding, that the Diamond family was becoming something legitimate. I thought it would make him feel better about the past. Ace stood slowly. His hands were shaking. He sold that information to River Locke, my mother who I have protected and cared for and built this entire empire to keep safe. Just handed my biggest enemy everything he needs to destroy me. No, he wouldn't. Frank loved me. He would never. He loved you 40 years ago, Mother. Now he's just a broken man who wants revenge. And you gave it to him. Ace's voice was rising now, the control finally fracturing. Do you understand what you've done? Locke will hit that tournament. He'll rob it, kill my security team, and destroy any chance I have of going legitimate. All because you wanted to help the man my father destroyed. Pearl began to sob, not the gentle tears of confusion, but great wrenching sounds of grief and understanding. Ruby moved to comfort her, but Ace held up a hand. Don't. Let her understand. Let her see what her guilt just cost us. He turned and walked out of the suite, leaving his mother broken and crying, and Ruby torn between the woman she had grown to love and the man whose world was falling apart. Ruby found Ace on the balcony, smoking a cigarette with hands that still trembled with barely controlled rage. She didn't mean it. Ruby's voice was soft but firm. The Alzheimer's makes her confused, makes her vulnerable to manipulation. I know that. Ace took a long drag. But it doesn't change what's about to happen. Locke thinks he's walking into the biggest score of his life. He'll have every resource, every gun, every advantage, and my people will be slaughtered. Then cancel the tournament. I already did. Called it off 20 minutes ago while you were with my mother. He stubbed out the cigarette. But that doesn't solve the real problem. Locke still thinks it's happening. Frank Sullivan doesn't know I know. And somewhere out there, my enemy is planning to destroy me based on information my own mother provided. Ruby moved to stand beside him at the railing. The sun was fully up now, turning Vegas into a city of glass and possibilities that were mostly lies. So what do you do? Ace turned to look at her, and something in his eyes made her breath catch. Not anger anymore. Something colder, more calculating. I do what my father taught me. I turn the trap around. What does that mean? It means Riverlock thinks he knows where I'll be vulnerable, but he's wrong. Ace's voice dropped to something dangerous. He's the one who's vulnerable. He's pulled all his resources to hit a tournament that won't happen, which means everything else he owns is unprotected. Understanding crashed over Ruby. You're going to hit him. While he's waiting for something that isn't coming, you're going to destroy everything he has. I'm going to end him. Ace's face was carved from stone. And then I'm going to deal with Frank Sullivan. The way he said it made Ruby's blood run cold. Ace, he's an old man, a broken man who's been nursing a grudge for 40 years. He's a threat to my family, to my mother, to you. Ace gripped her shoulders. Don't you understand? The moment he sold that information to Locke, he painted a target on everyone I love. On you, because Locke knows that hurting you hurts me. So you're going to kill him. Well, I'm going to protect what's mine. He pulled her close, his forehead against hers. By any means necessary. Ruby knew she should be horrified, should remind him that there were lines you didn't cross, rules you didn't break, even in Vegas. But she thought of Riverlock's cold smile, of the way he had touched her necklace with casual threat, of the danger that surrounded them like smoke. And she heard herself say, then do it smart, don't just react, make it count. Ace pulled back to look at her, surprise flickering across his features. What are you saying? I'm saying that if you're going to war, you need to win completely. Not just take territory, not just send a message. Win so thoroughly that no one ever threatens your family again. A slow smile crossed Ace's face, not the warm smile he sometimes gave her in private moments. Something else, something that belonged to the King of Vegas. You're not just beautiful, you're dangerous. I'm a survivor, and I'm learning from the best. Ruby took his hand. So tell me the plan, and let me help. They spent the next hour in Ace's office, laying out the strategy like a chess game where the pieces were human lives and the stakes were empire and survival. Ace made calls, cryptic, coded conversations with people whose loyalty was bought and paid for. Slade appeared, then Cash, then three other men whose faces Ruby had seen around the penthouse but whose names she didn't know. Locke will be at the Diamond Palace tomorrow night, Ace said, pointing to a map of Vegas spread across his desk. Waiting for the tournament. He'll have 20, maybe 25 men with him, his best people. Which leaves his other operations vulnerable, Slade added, his scarred face grim. The casino on Fremont, the sports betting operation, the loan shark business he runs out of Henderson. We hit them all, simultaneously. Ace's finger traced routes on the map. Take everything. Money, records, computers, anything that gives him power in this city. By the time he realizes the tournament isn't happening, it'll be too late. He'll have nothing left. What about Sullivan? Cash's voice was rough, eager. Want us to bring him in? Alive! Ace's voice was flat. I want to look him in the eye when I show him what his revenge cost him. Ruby watched the plan come together with a strange mix of fear and fascination. This was the world she had entered. The real Vegas beneath the neon and the shows and the carefully maintained illusion of glamour. This was where fortunes were won and lost on the turn of a card, where loyalty was currency, and where mercy was a luxury no one could afford. As the men dispersed to prepare, Ace turned to Ruby. You should stay here, with my mother, where it's safe. No. Ruby, you said I was yours, that I was part of this family. You don't get to protect me from the truth of what that means. She met his eyes steadily. I'm in this, all the way in, so don't shut me out now. For a long moment, Ace simply looked at her. Then he nodded slowly. Right, but you stay with Slate. You follow his orders exactly. And if anything goes wrong, you run. You understand me? I understand. He pulled her close and kissed her, hard and desperate and full of all the things neither of them was saying out loud. I love you. The words came out rough, like they'd been torn from somewhere deep inside him. I should have said it before. Should have told you every day since that first kiss. But I'm saying it now. I love you, Ruby Stone. And I'm going to keep you safe even if I have to burn this whole city to the ground. Ruby's eyes filled with tears. I love you too. Which is why you're going to be smart about this. Win clean, win completely, and come back to me. Always. The war happened in the dark hours before dawn when Vegas was at its most honest. When the tourists were sleeping off their losses and the dealers were counting down to shift change and the city showed its true face. Ruby watched it unfold from the security center in Diamond Palace, surrounded by monitors that showed feeds from across the city. Slate stood beside her, phone pressed to his ear, coordinating movements with military precision. At exactly 3 in the morning, Ace's people moved. 6 different locations hit simultaneously. Riverlock's casino on Fremont Street, his sports betting operation, his legitimate business fronts that laundered money from a dozen illegal enterprises. Ruby watched men in dark clothes move through buildings like shadows, watched them disable security systems and crack safes and load boxes of cash and records into unmarked vans. It was surgical, professional, and absolutely devastating. By 4 in the morning, Riverlock's empire had been gutted. At 4:15, Slate's phone rang. He listened for a moment, then nodded. Boss has Locke on the line, wants to know if you want to listen. Ruby knew she should say no, should maintain some distance from the brutal reality of what was happening. Instead, she nodded. Slate put the phone on speaker. Ace's voice came through, controlled and cold. Good morning, River. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important. There was a pause, then Riverlock's voice tight with barely suppressed rage. You knew about the tournament. You knew and you let me think that you were going to steal $50 million from me? Yes, I knew. Because unlike you, I protect my assets. And when someone threatens my family, I respond appropriately. Your mother is a confused old woman who talks too much. That's not my fault. No, but using that confusion against her is. Just like using Frank Sullivan's bitterness. Just like threatening Ruby at the gala. Ace's voice dropped even lower. You made this personal, River, and now you're learning what personal means in this city. This isn't over, Diamond. Yes, it is. You have 12 hours to leave Nevada. After that, I stopped being generous. The line went dead. Slate looked at Ruby. Boss wants to see you at the old Stardust site. Says to bring the car around. Ruby's stomach tightened. The Stardust site, where they were holding Frank Sullivan. The drive across the city felt surreal. Vegas in the pre-dawn darkness was a different animal. The neon muted, the streets empty, the desert visible beyond the city limits, like a reminder that all of this was just an oasis that could disappear as quickly as it had appeared. The old Stardust site was nothing but empty desert now. The hotel had been demolished years ago, leaving only concrete foundations and the ghosts of old Vegas glamour. A single trailer sat in the middle of the lot, temporary office from some construction project that had stalled. Light spilled from its windows into the darkness. Slate parked but didn't get out. Boss wants to see you alone. I'll be right here if you need me. Ruby walked to the trailer on unsteady legs. The door was unlocked. Inside, she found Ace standing over a man tied to a chair. Frank Sullivan looked exactly like his photograph from 40 years ago, just weathered by time and bitterness. 70 years old but looking older. Hands that still had the dealer's grace despite being bound. And eyes that held nothing but hate when they looked at Ace. But when they shifted to Ruby, confusion flickered across his features. You, from the diner. The girl who was kind to Pearl. My name is Ruby. I take care of Pearl now. I'm her companion. Frank's laugh was bitter. Her companion. Her jailer, you mean. Just another way for the diamonds to control her. To keep her locked in that golden cage. She's not a prisoner. She's safe, protected, loved. She's a trophy, just like she was for Jack Diamond. Just another thing to own and display. Frank's voice cracked. I loved her. Really loved her. Would have given her everything. You had nothing to give. Ace's voice was cold. You were a card dealer with dreams bigger than your bankroll. My father saw that. Saw that you would have dragged her down with you. Your father destroyed me because I was competition. Because I made her happy in ways he never could. Frank's eyes blazed with old fury. And you're just like him. Building your empire on broken people. Using Ruby here the same way your father used your mother. Ruby felt the words like a slap. But before she could respond, Ace spoke. You're right about one thing. My father was brutal. He took what he wanted and destroyed anyone who stood in his way. Including you. Ace moved closer to Frank. But I'm not my father. Because I'm going to give you something he never would have. What? A quick death? A choice. Ace pulled out his phone and showed Frank the screen. Bank transfer, $1 million. Enough money to leave Vegas. Start over somewhere else. Live out your years in peace instead of bitterness. Frank stared at the screen like it was a trap. Wait, Diane, because the woman I love had showed me that mercy is sometimes stronger than revenge. Because my mother, despite everything, still cares about you. And because I'm trying to be better than the man who raised me. Ace glanced at Ruby and she saw the question in his eyes. Saw him asking her if this was the right choice. If mercy was possible in a world built on calculated cruelty. Ruby stepped forward and knelt in front of Frank Sullivan. Pearl remembers you. On her good days, she talks about the shows at the Sands, about dancing, about feeling beautiful and young and full of possibilities. And she talks about you, about what you could have been together. Tears began to track down Frank's weathered face. But that was 40 years ago, Ruby continued gently. You can't get that time back. Can't undo what was done. All you can do is choose what happens next. Bitterness or peace. Revenge or release. Frank looked at her for a long moment, then at Ace, then at his bound hands. If I take your money and leave, does Pearl finally get to be free too? Free from the guilt of what your family did to me? She gets to remember you as someone who loved her, not as someone who used her sickness for revenge. Ace pulled out a knife and cut the ropes binding Frank's hands. That's the best any of us can hope for, to be remembered with love instead of hate. Frank stood slowly, rubbing his wrists. He looked at Ace with something that might have been respect. You're a better man than your father. Don't let this city make you forget that. Then he looked at Ruby. Take care of her. Pearl, I mean. Tell her I'm sorry, and that I hope she finds whatever peace there is left to find. He walked out of the trailer into the pre-dawn darkness, and Ruby knew they would never see him again. Ace pulled Ruby close and held her while the first light of morning began to touch the desert sky. Thank you, he whispered into her hair, for showing me there's another way. Thank you for listening. They stood there while Vegas woke up around them, while the neon gave way to sunlight, while the city transformed from night creature to day player, and the endless cycle began again. Somewhere, Riverlock was packing to leave Nevada with what little he had left. Somewhere, Frank Sullivan was headed toward a new life funded by Diamond Money and Diamond Mercy. Somewhere, Pearl was waking up in her penthouse, perhaps remembering, perhaps forgetting, but no longer carrying the weight of 40 years of guilt. And in the empty lot where the Stardust had once stood, where showgirls had danced and dealers had shuffled, and the old Vegas had lived in all its glorious, flawed magic, two people who had found each other in the unlikeliest of ways stood together and watched a new day begin. 6 months later, Ruby stood in a small apartment near Yale's campus and looked out at a very different landscape. New England autumn painted the trees in shades of gold and crimson. Historic buildings lined the streets with the weight of centuries. Students hurried past with coffee cups and textbooks, chasing dreams that had nothing to do with neon, or cards, or calculated risk. This was the life she had planned for, fought for, saved every dollar to achieve. And it felt both perfect and incomplete. Her theater design classes were everything she had hoped. Her professors praised her eye for detail and understanding of space and light. Her portfolio was growing with sketches and models that captured the magic of old Vegas and reimagined it for modern stages. But every night she video called a penthouse 59 floors above a city that refused to be left behind. Pearl appeared on a screen first, having one of her good days, excited to tell Ruby about a vintage costume auction she had attended with Ace. Oh, honey, you should have seen it. A headdress from the Tropicana. Real feathers. Real rhinestones. Your grandmother probably wore something just like it. Pearl's smile was bright, clear, present. I bought it for you, for when you come home to visit. Home, Pearl called Vegas home now when talking to Ruby. As if Ruby belonged to that world despite the 3,000 miles between them. Then Ace appeared, and Ruby's heart did that stupid thing it always did when she saw his face. How are the classes? Good, great actually. I'm working on a set design for a streetcar named Desire. Professor Chen says I have a natural understanding of how environment shapes character. Of course you do. You learned that in Vegas. Ace's smile was warm but tired. When are you coming back? Winter break. 3 weeks. 3 weeks. He ran a hand through his hair, silver gleaming at his temples. Feels like forever. Feels like yesterday that I left. They talked for another hour about everything and nothing. About Ruby's classes and Ace's newest business venture, a theater restoration project that would bring live entertainment back to downtown Vegas. About Pearl's good days and bad days. About the city that refused to release its grip on Ruby's heart despite the distance. When they finally said goodbye, Ruby sat in her quiet New England apartment and felt the pull of two worlds. The life she had planned, the education she had dreamed of, the future that looked exactly like she had always imagined, and the life she had found. The man who had given her everything while asking for nothing but her presence. The city that had shown her both its ugliest truths and its most beautiful possibilities. Her phone buzzed with a text from Ace. I love you. Come home soon. The city isn't the same without you. Ruby looked around her apartment, at the textbooks and sketches, at the life she was building that was supposed to be enough. And she realized that some cages were made of love and loyalty and the understanding that you could leave anytime but would always choose to stay. She texted back, I love you too. See you in 3 weeks. Save me a dance under the neon. Because Vegas was in her blood now, the real Vegas. The one that existed in the spaces between the tourist shows and the casino floors. The one where showgirls danced and dealers shuffled and broken people found redemption in the most unlikely places. Ruby Stone had come to Vegas looking for a way out. Instead, she had found a way in. To a family held together by love and loyalty and the understanding that mercy could be stronger than revenge. To a man who had learned that some treasures were worth more than any empire. To a city that showed you its darkest face and dared you to find the magic anyway. And as autumn turned to winter and the days counted down to her return to Nevada, Ruby understood that she had never really left at all. Some places claim you, some people change you, some stories write themselves into your bones until you can't remember who you were before they began. Vegas was her story now, Ace was her home, and the waitress who had once dreamed of escaping had become the woman who couldn't wait to return. Because in the end, the house always wins. But sometimes, if you're very lucky, you realize you were never really playing against it. You were playing for it all along. And the jackpot was never money or freedom or escape. It was finding the place where you belonged, the person who saw you, the life that was messy and complicated and perfect in all its flawed, glittering glory. Ruby closed her textbook and began packing for winter break. Vegas was waiting, and this time, when she walked through those neon-lit streets, it wouldn't be as a ghost trying to disappear. It would be as a diamond, and that made all the difference. The end.